Beneath the dust of forgotten centuries lie the echoes of journeys that reshaped the world roads, once pulsing with life, now silent and erased from maps. Picture a caravan of merchants navigating a winding mountain pass, their camels laden with silk and spices, or a lone explorer tracing a path through dense jungle where gold once flowed like water. These were the arteries of civilization, the hidden highways that connected empires, sparked revolutions, and spread ideas across continents until time swallowed them whole. Yet their absence doesn't mean they're gone. The fingerprints of these vanished routes are all around us, etched into languages, customs, and even the borders of nations we recognize today. Think about the last time you traveled, maybe by car, train, or plane. Every modern route you've ever followed stands on the shoulders of ancient trails blazed by people who walked with no GPS, no maps, just the stars and stories to guide them. Some of these paths were so vital they became legends, like the Silk Road, a name we all know. But what about the others? The forgotten forks in the road, the shortcuts lost to war, the trade networks buried by shifting sands. These are the stories that didn't make it into textbooks, yet they hold the keys to understanding how our world was stitched together. This isn't just a journey through history, it's a detective story. We'll follow clues left behind in crumbling ruins, cryptic texts, and the oral traditions of communities who still remember. From the amber roads of the Baltic, where sunlight was traded like currency, to the lost salt trails of Africa that built kingdoms, each of these 32 routes has a tale that will change how you see the past. Some were erased deliberately, secrets guarded by empires. Others faded slowly, reclaimed by nature or simply overshadowed by newer, faster paths. But their legacy, that's impossible to erase, so let's set out together, step by step, and uncover the roads that shaped us even if we never knew their names. The Silk Road wasn't just one road, it was a sprawling web of pathways, like veins branching out from a heartbeat. While the main routes between China and Rome steal the spotlight, countless smaller trails wove through mountains, deserts, and steppes, carrying more than just silk and spices. Imagine a hidden path through the Pamir Mountains, where traders from Tibet exchanged turquoise for Persian carpets, or a dusty track in Uzbekistan where Buddhist monks shared scriptures with Zoroastrian fire priests. These were the lifelines of forgotten exchanges, where a single caravan could alter the destiny of a distant village. Take the Tea Horse Road, a rugged branch threading through the Himalayas. For centuries, it was the only link between China's tea plantations and Tibet's horse breeders. Tea bricks, pressed as hard as stone, were currency here, traded for war horses that fortified empires. But when colonial powers shifted global trade to the seas, this treacherous route where porters navigated cliffs narrower than a donkey's stride slipped into obscurity. Today, you can still find echoes of it in the butter tea sipped in Tibetan monasteries, a recipe born from those long-ago barter stops. Then there's the Southern Silk Road, a jungle-cloaked trail few modern travelers could trace. While the northern route bustled with camels, the south whispered with the footsteps of merchants carrying rubies from Burma and pearls from the Maldives. This was where monsoon winds met monsoon markets, creating a cultural swirl so vibrant that Indonesian shadow puppets still tell tales of Hindu epics, carried there by traders 2,000 years ago. Yet as ports like Malacca rose to power, the overland path faded, leaving behind temple ruins swallowed by vines and dialects that blend Tamil with Old Khmer. What's haunting is how deliberately some branches disappeared. The Sogdian network, a chain of oasis towns run by savvy Central Asian merchants, was erased not by time but by conquest. When Arab armies swept through, they burned Sogdian libraries and rewrote maps, severing a hub that once taught China to play the lute and Persia to weave silk. But you can't silence a legacy that easily. Next time you hear a violin, remember, its ancestor, the bowed lute, traveled a Sogdian road no modern atlas shows. These lost branches teach us a quiet truth: history isn't just about the highways. It's in the footpaths, the detours, the deals struck in shadowed caravanserais. Every time a Bengali sari mirrors a Byzantine pattern, or a Mongolian throat song echoes an Afghan melody, we're hearing the whispers of routes that maps forgot. Long before credit cards or digital payments, there was a currency that caught sunlight in its palms: amber, the gold of the north. Picture this: a lump of fossilized resin, warm to the touch, glowing like captured honey, traveling from the pine forests of the Baltic to the palaces of Pharaoh Tutankhamun. This was the Amber Road, a 3,000-year-old superhighway of commerce and myth, where a single bead could buy an iron sword, and a necklace might ransom a king. What made amber so irresistible? To the ancient Greeks, it was the tears of Apollo's daughters, hardened by the sea. Roman nobles believed wearing it warded off evil spirits, while Egyptian priests burned it as incense to summon gods. But beyond legend, amber had practical magic. It's electrostatic. Rub it against cloth and it attracts feathers, a trick that baffled scientists until the 16th century. No wonder traders braved bandits and blizzards to haul it south. The route itself was a marvel of Bronze Age logistics. Starting in what's now Lithuania and Poland, raw amber would travel down river on dugout canoes to the Vistula and Danube. From there, merchants transferred it to ox carts, winding through the Carpathian Mountains where Celtic tribes demanded tolls in amber beads before reaching the Adriatic. The final leg, Phoenician ships carried it to Egypt, Greece, and beyond. Archaeologists have found Baltic amber in Mycenaean tombs, proving this network thrived 1,000 years before Rome existed. Yet the Amber Road's real power wasn't just moving goods, it moved ideas. Alongside those golden nuggets traveled motifs for art, designs for tools, even whispers of new religions. A Viking Age hoard in Sweden contained an amber Buddha from India, while Etruscan tombs in Italy held amber carved into Baltic thunder gods. This was globalization before the word existed. So why did it vanish? Blame politics and progress. When Rome fell, the road fractured into local trails. Later, the Hanseatic League monopolized Baltic trade, favoring sea routes over land. By the Middle Ages, amber was still prized, but the path that once connected polar nights to desert noons lived only in sagas. But here's the twist: the Amber Road never truly disappeared. When Napoleon's army occupied Prussia, soldiers found peasants still using ancient amber trails as cattle paths. Today, a single amber workshop in Latvia keeps alive a carving technique unchanged since the Iron Age. And in a quiet corner of the Vatican museums, there's a 2,000-year-old amber cup, its surface still glowing like it just arrived from the north, proof that some roads, even when forgotten, never lose their shine. Imagine a desert so vast and silent, the only sound for miles is the creak of camel saddles and the whisper of wind over dunes. This was the incense route, a web of trails stretching 2,000 miles from Yemen's misty highlands to the bustling markets of Gaza. Here, the air wasn't filled with dust alone. It carried the sacred smoke of frankincense, a scent so divine, ancient Egyptians believed it was the sweat of gods crystallized under the sun. Frankincense and myrrh weren't just spices, they were the lifeblood of empires. In Rome, emperors burned fortunes worth to mask the stench of crowded streets, while in Jerusalem, priests used them to sanctify temple rituals. The demand was so insatiable that a single camel load could buy a vineyard in Damascus. But harvesting these resins was a dance with danger. Workers in Oman's Dhofar region braved sheer cliffs and venomous snakes to scrape tears of sap from wild frankincense trees, a technique unchanged for millennia. The route itself was a marvel of endurance. Caravans of up to 2,000 camels, each carrying 300 pounds of resin, plodded for months across the empty quarter where daytime heat could melt lead. They navigated by stars and stone cairns, stopping at oasis towns like Petra, where Nabatean merchants taxed every bale. These way stations weren't just pit stops, they flourished into cities of sandstone and gold, with theaters and temples funded entirely by the perfume trade. Yet the incense route's downfall came from an unexpected rival, the monsoon wind. When Greek sailors discovered they could sail directly from India to Egypt using seasonal winds, ships began bypassing the desert entirely. Overland travel, with its bandits and droughts, couldn't compete. By the time Christianity spread, myrrh was still used to anoint kings, but the caravans that brought it were ghosts. Today, the route's legacy hides in plain sight. In a monastery in Sinai, monks still burn frankincense harvested from the same trees that supplied Cleopatra. Archaeologists in Saudi Arabia recently uncovered a lost city along the route, its walls etched with inscriptions celebrating the gods of fragrance. And every Christmas, when we hear the story of 3 gifts carried to Bethlehem, we're hearing an echo of a journey that once moved nations one fragrant step at a time. 2,500 years ago, a road stretched across the ancient world so precisely engineered, a royal message could race from the shores of the Aegean Sea to the heart of Persia in just 7 days. This was the royal road, not just a path, but a pulsating artery of the Achaemenid Empire, where the rhythm of hooves and sandals kept time with the heartbeat of history. Picture a chain of way stations spaced a day's ride apart, each stocked with fresh horses and armed guards, allowing couriers to relay urgent scrolls without stopping. The Greek historian Herodotus marveled at their speed, writing, "Neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night stays these couriers." Sound familiar? That phrase would later inspire modern postal services, proving some ideas never truly fade. But the Royal Road was more than a postal route. It was a masterclass in imperial control. Stretching from Sardis in modern Turkey to Susa in Iran, its carefully measured mile markers and fortified bridges allowed armies to march, taxes to flow, and spies to move unseen. Persian engineers built it with a gentle slope for wheeled carts, a detail Roman road builders would copy centuries later. Merchants thrived here too, carrying lapis lazuli from Afghanistan to Greek sculptors, or cinnamon from India to Mediterranean kitchens. The road became so vital that when Alexander the Great conquered Persia, his first act was to commandeer it, using those same way stations to speed his own orders across the conquered land. Yet what's fascinating is how the Royal Road didn't just vanish, it dissolved into the landscape. As the Achaemenid Empire crumbled, sections were abandoned to sandstorms or repurposed by local farmers. In Turkey, villagers still follow its ghostly outline to graze sheep, unaware their footpaths trace the exact route Persian kings once walked. Archaeologists recently found one of its original bridges in Iran, hidden beneath layers of silt, its stonework so precise it could bear weight today. The road's greatest legacy, though, lies in the way it rewired human connection. Before it, most trade routes meandered like rivers. The Royal Road proved that straight, state-maintained highways could bind an empire together, a lesson Rome absorbed so thoroughly that their own roads followed Persian blueprints. Even the Silk Road borrowed its relay system of way stations, so next time you swipe a screen to track a package speeding across continents, remember, You're witnessing the echo of an idea born on a dusty path 2.5 millennia ago, where the first global network began with a single royal decree. Beneath the scorching sun of the Sahara, where shifting dunes erase footsteps almost as quickly as they're made, an invisible highway once pulsed with life. This was the Trans-Saharan trade network, a labyrinth of trails where caravans of up to 12,000 camels, each beast laden with gold bars the size of bricks, inched across a sea of sand so vast it could swallow continents. The scale was staggering. Historians estimate that between the 8th and 16th centuries, 2/3 of the world's gold supply traveled these paths, flowing from West African mines to the mints of Venice and Damascus. At the heart of this system lay a simple but revolutionary exchange: gold for salt. In the malarial jungles of the Akan goldfields, miners dug ore so pure it could be hammered into jewelry without smelting. Meanwhile, in the Sahara's northern oases, workers carved slabs of salt from dried lakebeds, a commodity worth its weight in gold south of the desert, where the mineral was scarce enough to preserve empires. A single camel load of salt could purchase an enslaved person in Timbuktu, while a pound of gold dust bought 10 pounds of salt in Morocco. These weren't just trade goods, they were the building blocks of power. The caravans themselves were feats of human endurance, guided by the Tuareg, the blue men of the desert, who navigated by stars and wind patterns. Journeys could last 90 days without a single village in sight. At night, merchants slept atop their camels to avoid scorpions, while during the day they rationed water from ostrich egg canteens. The risks were brutal. Sandstorms could bury entire caravans, and bandits lurked near oases. Yet the rewards justified the peril. When Mansa Musa, the emperor of Mali, made his famous pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324, his caravan included 60,000 porters and so much gold that its distribution along the route crashed economies in Cairo and Medina for a decade. What's astonishing is how these routes shaped civilizations far beyond Africa. The gold that crossed the Sahara became the dinars that funded the Renaissance, the florins that built Venetian palaces, even the wedding rings of European royalty. Meanwhile, Timbuktu grew into a scholarly metropolis with libraries holding 700,000 manuscripts, some written in gold ink, attracting thinkers from as far as Baghdad. The city's university predated Oxford by 2 centuries, proof that trade routes carry ideas as surely as they do cargo. But the desert's dominance couldn't last forever. When Portuguese ships began sailing down Africa's west coast in the 15th century, they bypassed the Sahara entirely, loading gold directly from Elmina Castle in modern Ghana. By the time Columbus reached the Americas, the overland routes were fading, though not without leaving indelible marks. Today, the salt caravans still run on a smaller scale, following the same paths their ancestors did 1,000 years ago. And if you visit the grand mosques of Mali, look closely at the walls. Some still bear traces of gold dust mixed into the plaster, a shimmering reminder that the world was connected long before globalization became a buzzword. The next time you sprinkle salt on your food or admire a gold necklace, remember, these everyday substances once moved mountains, built universities, and forged links between continents, all because a line of camels dared to walk where no map could follow. High in the mist-wrapped mountains where China meets Tibet, a narrow path clings to cliffs so sheer that a single misstep could send a traveler plunging into oblivion. This was the Tea Horse Road, not just a trade route, but a vertical lifeline connecting 2 worlds. For over 1,000 years, caravans of rugged Tibetan ponies and sure-footed mules navigated these switchbacks, their saddlebags bulging with tightly packed bricks of fermented tea. In return, they carried back something far more precious to Chinese emperors: war horses, bred on the high plateaus to be stronger and faster than anything in the lowlands. The trade was born from necessity. Tibet's thin, oxygen-starved air made farming nearly impossible, but its people discovered that drinking butter tea, a hearty mix of fermented leaves, yak butter, and salt, could sustain them through brutal winters. Meanwhile, China's dynasties faced constant threats from northern nomads and desperately needed Tibetan horses to fortify their cavalry. A single brick of pearl tea, stamped with imperial seals, could buy a sturdy stallion. By the Tang dynasty, this barter system had evolved into a state-controlled network stretching 3,000 kilometers, with customs posts monitoring every ounce of tea and every hoofbeat crossing the border. What made this route extraordinary wasn't just its cargo, it was the people who kept it alive. The tea porters, mostly ethnic minorities like the Naxi and Yi, carried loads heavier than their own weight up altitudes where modern climbers use oxygen tanks. Their secret, leather harnesses lined with wool to prevent rope burns, and a steady rhythm of folk songs to synchronize their steps on swaying rope bridges. Some stretches were so treacherous that porters crawled on all fours, their tea bricks lashed to wooden frames that scraped against cliff walls. Yet the tea horse road was more than an economic channel, it was a cultural synapse. Along its winding paths, Tibetan monks exchanged medicinal knowledge with Chinese herbalists, creating hybrid remedies still used today. The route's resting stations evolved into bustling market towns where Persian silver coins jingled alongside Sichuan peppercorns. Even Buddhism traveled these trails, with Tibetan lamas carrying sutras translated from Sanskrit to Chinese and back again, blending spiritual traditions as seamlessly as the butter in their tea. The road's decline came with a modern invention, the steamship, when British colonizers began importing Indian tea to Tibet via Calcutta in the 19th century. The centuries-old overland trade became obsolete. By the time highways reached these remote valleys in the 1950s, many sections of the trail had been reclaimed by landslides or thorny thickets. But traces linger in unexpected places. In Lossa's Barker market, elderly vendors still weigh tea bricks on brass scales identical to those their ancestors used. The yak butter tea served in Tibetan monasteries follows recipes perfected over countless caravan stops. And deep in Yunnan's tea mountains, a few aging masters continue pressing leaves into bricks using stone molds carved with the same floral patterns that once guaranteed authenticity to horse traders. These quiet survivals remind us that history isn't always written in grand treaties or battles. Sometimes it's steeped in the leaves at the bottom of a weathered wooden cup. The Via Maris wasn't just a road, it was a shimmering ribbon of civilization hugging the Mediterranean coast, where the scent of salt water mingled with the tang of copper and the perfume of crushed spices. Picture a bustling port in ancient Tyre, where Phoenician merchants haggled over ingots of Cypriot copper, while Egyptian scribes recorded shipments of frankincense bound for Babylon. This was the Way of the Sea, a route so vital it shaped the destiny of empires, only to vanish beneath the dunes like a shipwreck swallowed by waves. What made the Via Maris extraordinary wasn't just its cargo. It was the ideas that traveled alongside them. When Egyptian chariot designs reached the Hittites via this route, they revolutionized warfare. When Mesopotamian cuneiform symbols hopped onto Phoenician clay tablets, they evolved into the alphabet you're reading right now. Even something as simple as the olive press, a technology that spread along this corridor, transformed Mediterranean diets forever. The road was a living classroom where potters from Gaza taught Canaanite apprentices how to glaze ceramics with cobalt from Sinai, and where Babylonian astronomers shared star charts with Greek sailors. But the Via Maris had a darker side. Its strategic importance made it a battleground for every empire from the pharaohs to the Romans. Archaeologists have found layers of arrowheads and burnt grain in Megiddo, a fortress city guarding the route, evidence of sieges so frequent the Bible dubbed the site Armageddon, the apocalyptic final battlefield. Yet each conqueror, from Thutmose III to Alexander the Great, quickly realized they couldn't control the region without maintaining this coastal lifeline. The route's disappearance was a slow fade, not a sudden erasure. As ships grew sturdier, maritime trade bypassed the land route. Earthquakes toppled its way stations, and desert sands buried milestones. By the Middle Ages, even the name Via Maris was forgotten, surviving only in a cryptic reference in the book of Isaiah. Yet its fingerprints are everywhere. The glass-blowing techniques of Venice, perfected in Via Maris workshops, the purple dye that colored Roman senators' robes, first extracted from seashells by Phoenicians along this coast. Today, if you walk the beaches of Tel Aviv, you might stumble upon a pottery shard stamped with a pharaoh's cartouche, a whisper from a time when this shoreline wasn't just sand and surf, but the pulsing heart of the ancient world. The Via Maris may have vanished from maps, but its legacy lingers in every letter we write, every olive we press, every wheel that rolls down a modern highway tracing its ghostly path. Imagine a road so ancient its origins blur into myth, a path trodden by the sandals of Greek soldiers, the hooves of Mongol ponies, and the wheels of British stagecoaches. The Grand Trunk Road wasn't just a thoroughfare, it was the spine of South Asia, a 2,500-year-old tapestry woven from conquest, commerce, and countless human stories. Stretching over 2,000 kilometers from the jungles of Bengal to the passes of the Khyber, this was where empires clashed and merged, leaving behind layers of history like strata in a canyon wall. The road's genius lay in its simplicity. Unlike the straight Roman highways or the winding silk routes, the Grand Trunk adapted to the land, following rivers, skirting mountains, and threading through valleys where settlements naturally clustered. Sher Shah Suri, the Afghan emperor who rebuilt it in the 16th century, added milestones and shade trees, creating a proto-modern highway system. Caravanserais dotted its length, offering rest to travelers speaking dozens of languages. A single day's journey might reveal Punjabi farmers hauling melons, Bengali weavers trading muslin, and Persian poets reciting verses under the same banyan tree. But the Grand Trunk's true power was cultural alchemy. Along its dust, Sikh gurus preached tolerance beside Sufi shrines where Qawwali music fused Hindu and Islamic traditions. The road birthed hybrid languages. Urdu, for instance, blossomed as a bridge tongue between Persian elites and local traders. Even food transformed here. Mughal chefs introduced saffron to Punjabi kitchens, while Bengali sweets traveled west, evolving into new delicacies. This wasn't just movement of goods, it was the slow, savory simmer of a shared identity. Yet today, the road is a ghost of itself. Modern highways bypass its crumbling caravanserais, political borders slice through its once seamless route. In Pakistan, segments near Lahore still bear the name GT Road, but the camel caravans have been replaced by rickshaws and trucks. In India, some original stone bridges still stand, their arches now dwarfed by overpasses. The most poignant relic, the Kos Minar's centuries-old sandstone pillars marking each Kos about 2 miles. Many now stand forgotten in fields, their inscriptions weathered smooth by monsoons. But dig deeper and the road's pulse still beats. The Dobba's roadside eateries lining modern highways serve recipes perfected for Grand Trunk travelers: slow-cooked lentils, skewered meats, flatbread slapped fresh onto griddles. The truck art of Pakistan, with its kaleidoscopic colors and poetic slogans, echoes the vibrant caravan decorations of old. And in Amritsar, the Golden Temple's Langar community kitchen feeds thousands daily, a tradition born when Guru Nanak insisted travelers of all faiths break bread together. The Grand Trunk Road may no longer dominate maps, but its legacy lives in the rhythm of South Asian life, in the Mela festivals that still draw crowds to ancient roadside shrines, in the Bollywood films where star-crossed lovers elope along its remnants, even in the shared slang between Delhi and Dhaka. It reminds us that roads aren't just about reaching destinations, they're about the connections forged along the way, long after the original path fades from view. The Romans didn't just build roads, they wove a skeletal framework that held an empire together, stone by stone, mile by mile. Picture a legionary stepping onto freshly laid basalt slabs outside Rome, his sandals clicking against pavement so precisely leveled that a chariot could race across it without spilling a drop of wine. These weren't mere paths, they were feats of engineering so advanced that some stretches still lie buried beneath modern highways, their gutters and curbstones intact after 2,000 years. The Appian Way, the first of these colossal projects, began in 312 BC as a military supply line, but it soon became something far grander, a lifeline of empire, a conveyor belt of culture, and a blueprint for the future. What made Roman roads revolutionary wasn't just their durability, it was their design philosophy. Surveyors mapped routes with near mathematical precision, using a tool called a groma to align straightaways across valleys and hills. Engineers layered crushed stone, mortar, and volcanic ash into a foundation that drained rainwater through cleverly sloped surfaces. The result, a network spanning 53,000 miles from the misty highlands of Scotland to the sun-baked markets of Damascus. Soldiers could march 30 miles a day on these roads, while messengers relaying imperial decrees changed horses at mutations way stations spaced every 10 miles like ancient pit stops. Yet the true magic of these roads lay in what they carried beyond soldiers and carts. Latin phrases hitchhiked with merchants to Germania, evolving into the roots of French, Spanish, and Romanian. Olive oil from Hispania, glass from Syria, and British hunting dogs all flowed along these veins, turning local tribes into cosmopolitan communities. In Gaul, archaeologists found a roadside inn's menu offering oysters from the Atlantic and dates from Mesopotamia, proof that globalization didn't start with the internet. But time, as it does, erased many of these routes. Medieval farmers pilfered stones for cottages, while floods buried whole sections under silt. Some paths vanished ironically because they worked too well. Modern cities like London and Paris grew directly atop Roman thoroughfares, their street grids still mirroring ancient blueprints. In rural Croatia, though, you can walk untouched stretches of the Via Flavia, where ruts worn by chariot wheels remain visible, as if the drivers just vanished yesterday. The most haunting legacy isn't in the stones but in the ideas they carried. Roman surveyors introduced the concept of standardized distances, measured in milia passuum, 1,000 pace units that became our mile. Their road markers evolved into modern highway signs, and their postal system inspired everything from the Pony Express to FedEx. Next time you're stuck in traffic on a straight, tree-lined avenue, look down. You might be riding atop the ghost of a road that once whispered with the footsteps of legionaries, their echoes now buried beneath your tires. Centuries before salt shakers graced every table, this humble mineral was worth its weight in gold, sometimes literally. Imagine a caravan emerging from the Sahara's shimmering haze, its camels laden with gleaming white blocks cut from the heart of the desert. These were the salt roads, a network of trails so essential they built kingdoms, sparked wars, and even shaped the very language we use today. In medieval Timbuktu, merchants traded slabs of Saharan salt for bolts of Venetian silk, while in the Alps, miners lowered themselves into icy crevices to chip white gold from ancient seabeds. The reason: without salt, meat couldn't be preserved, leather couldn't be tanned, and human bodies couldn't retain vital fluids in scorching climates. This wasn't just commerce, it was survival etched into the earth. The most legendary of these routes crisscrossed the Sahara, where salt from the mines of Taoudeni traveled 1,000 kilometers to the markets of West Africa. Workers braved 100-degree heat to carve 3-foot-long slabs from underground deposits, each weighing as much as a grown man. These bricks became currency. In 14th century Mali, a single slab could buy a goat, while 10 might ransom a nobleman. The trade was so lucrative that the Ghana Empire taxed every ounce passing through its borders, amassing wealth that dazzled even Arab geographers. One account describes the emperor's court as a place where gold grew like carrots in the sand, all funded by salt tolls. But the salt roads weren't confined to deserts. In Europe, the Via Salaria connected Rome to the Adriatic salt pans, its name echoing through millennia. Today's Italian word for salary, salario, stems from the salt paid to Roman soldiers. Along Austria's Salzkammergut route, barges floated salt down the Salzach River, literally salt water, passing castles built by merchants who became nobles through brine. Even China's Sichuan province thrived on salt wells tapping into underground brine pools, their bamboo pipelines snaking through mountains like prehistoric plumbing. What's fascinating is how these routes sculpted culture. In Ethiopia's Danakil Depression, where salt is still quarried by hand, tribal agreements govern extraction rights unchanged since the time of King Solomon. The phrase, "worth your salt," traces back to Roman soldiers' payments, while in Poland, the Wieliczka salt mines carved chapels, hosted royal weddings because where salt flowed, power followed. Then came the tipping point, industrialization. When 19th century chemists learned to mass-produce salt, its value plummeted. Railroads replaced camel caravans, refrigeration made preservation obsolete. The mines and markets that once buzzed with traders fell silent, their routes fading like salt dissolving in water. Yet traces remain. In Niger's Tuareg communities, elders still navigate by stars using songs that map long-abandoned salt trails. In Burgundy, France, roads lined with salt-resistant trees mark medieval routes where merchants once dodged bandits. And in every language, idioms about salt, from salting the earth to the salt of the earth, whisper of an era when this crystal shaped destiny. Today, we sprinkle salt without a second thought, but next time you taste its sharpness on your lips, remember, that tiny grain once moved armies, built cathedrals, and forged connections across continents, all along roads that vanished from maps but never really left us. Long before silk became China's most coveted export, another treasure flowed westward along hidden mountain passes and river valleys, Jade, a stone so revered it was considered the essence of heaven itself. The Jade Road thrived for millennia, a quiet but powerful network where blocks of nephrite and jadeite traveled from the mines of cotton to the workshops of ancient China, carving not just ornaments but the very soul of East Asian culture. Unlike the bustling Silk Road, this route was whispered about in court poetry and buried in royal tombs, its significance measured not in volume of trade but in the weight of belief. What made Jade so extraordinary? To the Liangzhu culture 5,000 years ago, it was the stone of immortality, carved into by discs and Kong tubes for rituals communicating with ancestors. The Shang dynasty's kings were buried in jade suits to protect their spirits, while Confucius compared its unyielding beauty to the virtues of a noble heart, smooth yet unbreakable, luminous yet humble. This wasn't mere symbolism. Jade's physical properties made it magical. Harder than steel yet warm to the touch, it could be polished to a mirror shine that seemed to hold light within, a quality craftsmen called the glow of condensed moonlight. The route itself was a marvel of prehistoric logistics. From the Tarim Basin's Jade Gate near Dunhuang, traders hauled boulders along the treacherous Hexi corridor where bandits and sandstorms lurked. Some stones traveled by raft down the Yellow River, lashed to bamboo floats, while others were carried on the backs of yaks across the Kunlun Mountains. Archaeologists have found jade from Xinjiang in Shang Dynasty tombs over 3,000 kilometers away, proof that this network predated the Silk Road by centuries. Along the way, the stone transformed. Cotton's milky white nephrite became ceremonial blades in Sichuan, while Burmese jadate, arriving via Yunnan, evolved into the emerald green pendants favored by Qing Dynasty empresses. Yet the Jade Road's real power wasn't in moving stone, it was in spreading ideas. Buddhist monks carried small jade amulets along these trails as talismans, their teachings blending with local animist beliefs. The Cottonese told of jade forming where rainbows touched the earth, a myth that seeped into Chinese folklore. Even the iconic Chinese dragon, often depicted clutching a jade pearl, may trace its origins to Central Asian serpent deities worshipped by jade mining cultures. So why did this route fade? Iron and silk simply offered better profits. As the Silk Road boomed, jade became a luxury sidelined by more practical trades. By the Tang Dynasty, the mines of cotton were just another stop on a broader network, their stones now shipped alongside bolts of silk and sacks of tea. But jade never lost its sacred status. Today, you can still see its legacy in Beijing's Forbidden City, where the Qianlong Emperor's jade collection fills entire halls, or in the tiny amulets given to Chinese children for protection. The road itself may have vanished, but its gift endures every time a craftsman's chisel meets that luminous stone. The echo of an ancient journey rings anew. In the shadowed valleys of Bronze Age Europe, a metal more precious than gold shaped the destiny of civilizations, not glittering gold itself, but humble tin. Without this unassuming element, bronze could not exist, and without bronze, the wheels of early progress would have ground to a halt. Picture Cornish miners in what's now Britain, chipping cassiterite from waterlogged pits by torchlight, unaware their labor would forge weapons as far away as Mesopotamia. The tin routes formed an invisible web connecting distant corners of the ancient world, from the foggy moors of Devon to the sun-baked workshops of Mycenae, where artisans alloyed it with Cypriot copper to create tools that built empires. What made tin so revolutionary? Bronze, a blend of 90% copper and 10% tin, was the SpaceX of its day, enabling everything from plows that fed cities to swords that conquered them. But while copper deposits were widespread, tin was vanishingly rare, found in only a handful of places like Cornwall, Spain's Sierra Morena, and Afghanistan's Badakhshan. This scarcity turned tin into a geopolitical chess piece. Hittite texts speak of kings hoarding it like treasure, while shipwrecks off Turkey's coast reveal ingots stamped with the marks of far-flung traders. The most astonishing evidence lies in Scandinavia, where Bronze Age burials contain jewelry made from British tin, proving these networks reached farther than we ever imagined. The routes themselves were feats of ingenuity. In Britain, miners followed tin-bearing streams, using sheepskin to trap glittering particles, a technique still visible in place names like Jordan Valley, derived from the Cornish word for tin ore. From there, ingots traveled by dugout canoe along river systems to the Channel, where Phoenician middlemen shipped them south. Overland, traders used the Loire and Rhone rivers as liquid highways, with ox-drawn carts completing the final legs to Mediterranean ports. Along the way, fortified way stations like Hungary's Százhalombatta guarded shipments, their walls lined with tin bars like a prehistoric Fort Knox. Yet the true power of these routes wasn't just in moving metal. it was in spreading innovation. When Mycenaean smiths learned to add arsenic for harder bronze, the recipe raced northward along tin trails, showing up in German spearheads within generations. The iconic Nebra sky disk, Europe's oldest known star map, used Cornish tin in its bronze celestial symbols, linking mining villages to astral worship. Even language traveled these paths. The Celtic word for tin, kassateros, echoes through Greek and Sanskrit, hinting at a shared Bronze Age lexicon born of trade. The tin route's disappearance wasn't sudden but inevitable. When iron smelting spread after 1200 BC, it didn't require scarce alloys, just common ore and hotter furnaces. Like railroad tracks reclaimed by forest, the tin paths faded, their way stations crumbling into hillocks, yet their legacy pulses in unexpected places. The wealth from Cornish tin funded Celtic rebellions against Rome 2,000 years later. The bronze bells of Tibetan monasteries still ring with tin mined from the same veins that once supplied Shang dynasty ritual vessels. And in a quiet corner of the British Museum, a tiny tin ingot from 3,000 years ago sits beside a smartphone, a poignant reminder that every technological revolution, past or present, relies on supply chains we seldom see. For centuries, the Indian Ocean shimmered with the sails of 1,000 ships, their hulls swollen with cargoes that could make a man rich or start a war. Black pepper from Malabar, cinnamon from Ceylon, cloves so fragrant they were worth more than gold by weight. This was the Spice Route network, an aquatic silk road where Arab dhows, Chinese junks, and Javanese outriggers crisscrossed monsoonal currents like threads in a vast, salty tapestry. Unlike the overland trails we've explored, these were highways of wind and wave, governed not by emperors but by the rhythms of the trade winds, southwest from April to September, northeast from November to March. To sail against them was folly, to ride them was to unlock the wealth of continents. The genius of this system lay in its decentralized harmony. In the port of Calicut, Hindu merchants from Gujarat bargained with Muslim traders from Oman over sacks of cardamom, while Chinese officials recorded transactions in ledgers using ink from the same voyages. Zanzibar's markets brimmed with Indonesian nutmeg and Persian saffron, proof that no single power controlled the flow. Even the humble coconut became currency, its fibers caulked ships, its meat fed sailors, and its shells were carved into measuring cups to portion out peppercorns. The ocean itself was the great equalizer. A Malay proverb held that the wind and sea belong to all, like the air we breathe. Spices weren't just commodities, they were the original influencers. In Rome, Nero burned a year's worth of cinnamon at his wife's funeral to flaunt his wealth, while medieval European apothecaries prescribed pepper for everything from gout to melancholia. The Maldives became a refueling hub not for oil, but for coir rope and dried tuna staples that kept ships seaworthy and crews fed. And in Zanzibar's stone town, the scent of cloves still seeps from 19th century warehouses, where enslaved laborers packed the buds that flavored everything from Christmas hams to Egyptian mummification resins. But the route's true legacy simmered in kitchens from Baghdad to Guangzhou. Persian cooks blended Indian black pepper with local barberries, creating the tart sweet stews that evolved into biryani. Chinese sailors introduced soy sauce to Java, where it married with turmeric and tamarind in dishes still served at royal weddings. Even the humble curry owes its global spread to these maritime exchanges. The word itself comes from the Tamil kari, meaning sauce, carried by Portuguese sailors who'd tasted it in Kerala's ports. The system's unraveling came with European greed. When Vasco da Gama rounded the Cape of Good Hope in 1498, he didn't just open a new route, he shattered an ancient balance. Portuguese carracks mounted with cannons demanded tribute from Swahili dhows. Dutch East India Company ships burned entire spice groves in the Moluccas to manipulate prices. By the time the British took Ceylon in 1816, the ocean's freewheeling trade had been shackled to colonial monopolies, yet the spice routes never fully vanished. In Oman's souks, frankincense still changes hands in burlap sacks, weighed on scales unchanged since Sinbad's era. The seafaring Bugis of Sulawesi navigate by stars and ancient sea charts, their wooden pinnaces ships among the last still carrying spices without GPS. And when you sprinkle cinnamon on your oatmeal or bite into a ginger cookie, you're tasting more than flavor. You're savoring the echoes of an ocean that once connected the world, one peppercorn at a time. The Great Mississippi wasn't just a river, it was a liquid interstate, a pulsating network of trade routes that connected the Arctic Circle to the Gulf of Mexico centuries before railroads or highways existed. Picture a birchbark canoe gliding silently at dawn, its hull packed with copper from Lake Superior, seashells from the Florida coast, and obsidian from the Rocky Mountains. This was North America's original supply chain, where ideas and goods traveled as fluidly as the current itself, binding distant cultures into a continent-spanning exchange system that thrived for thousands of years. What made this water highway extraordinary was its sheer scale. The Mississippi Basin drains 40% of what's now the United States, with tributaries like the Ohio, Missouri, and Arkansas rivers acting as natural conveyor belts. Archaeologists have found Minnesota pipestone, a sacred material carved into ceremonial pipes in burial mounds as far south as Louisiana, while Gulf Coast conch shells adorned headdresses in Wisconsin. The river didn't just move objects, it transmitted entire worldviews. When Cahokia, the continent's largest pre-Columbian city, rose near modern St. Louis around 1000 AD, its monumental earthworks aligned with celestial events observed by tribes from the Great Lakes to the Delta. The mechanics of this trade were brilliantly adapted to the land. In the north, Ojibwe traders portaged canoes between watersheds, following trails worn smooth by generations of moccasins. Down south, the Natchez used dugouts carved from giant cypress logs to navigate floodplains during spring melts, timing their journeys to seasonal fish runs that doubled as mobile feasts. At strategic junctions like the confluence of the Mississippi and Ohio, neutral trading hubs emerged where even rival tribes observed truces. One French explorer in the 1600s described a marketplace where Dakota traders bartered dried bison meat for Illinois maize, using sign language to bridge linguistic divides, a precursor to modern commodity exchanges. But the real magic lay in what wasn't traded. Unlike European mercantile systems obsessed with accumulation, indigenous commerce prioritized reciprocity and ritual. Shell beads from the Atlantic, known as wampum, weren't just currency, they were living records with purple and white patterns encoding treaties and stories. Copper from Michigan's Keweenaw Peninsula became sacred talismans rather than tools, pounded into effigies of mythical water spirits. Even the river itself was a spiritual entity. The Sioux called it Wakpatanka, the great mysterious river, and offered tobacco before crossing its waters. The network's unraveling came with brutal speed. When French fur traders arrived in the 17th century, they co-opted existing routes for the beaver trade, introducing guns and alcohol as bargaining chips. By the time of the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, steamboats had replaced canoes, and treaties redrew the map without regard for ancient waterways. Yet the river's memory persists in unexpected ways. The modern city of Memphis stands where Chickasaw traders once met Choctaw merchants. Louisiana's bayous still bear names derived from Choctaw words for slow water. And along the riverbanks, elders from the Quapaw and Osage nations continue to harvest river cane for baskets using techniques unchanged when their ancestors traded with Cahokia. Next time you cross the Mississippi on a steel bridge or watch barges haul grain toward New Orleans, look closer. Those murky waters hold echoes of a time when the continent spoke a common language, not of words but of currents carrying more than cargo, carrying connection itself. The image of a Viking longship conjures visions of raids and plunder, but these sleek vessels were just as likely to carry bolts of Byzantine silk or blocks of Icelandic whetstone as they were battle axes. From the icy fjords of Norway to the sun-drenched markets of Baghdad, Norse traders stitched together a network so vast it reshaped 3 continents, only to fade into obscurity when medieval kings began drawing borders and building castles. What made the Viking trade routes extraordinary was their adaptability. While the Silk Road relied on camels and caravanserais, Norse merchants used their legendary longships to pivot between oceans and rivers with terrifying efficiency. A single crew might sail the North Sea to England's Humber estuary, then drag their ship overland to the Trent River, reaching the heart of Mercia without ever facing a fortified wall. In the east, they portaged from the Baltic Storgava River to the Dnieper, riding currents all the way to Constantinople, where Varangian guards, mostly Swedes, became the Byzantine emperor's personal bodyguards. The sheer range is staggering. Arabic coins stamped in 9th century Samarkand have been found in a Swedish farmer's field, while Newfoundland's Elands Orcs Meadows proves they crossed the Atlantic centuries before Columbus. The cargo lists read like a medieval Amazon catalogue. Greenland's Norse exported walrus ivory so coveted that a single tusk could buy a herd of cattle in Dublin. Russian forests supplied honey and furs for Arabic perfume makers, while Norwegian soapstone cookware turned up in Irish monasteries. Even enslaved people moved along these routes. The word thrall comes from Old Norse, and genetic studies show Slavic DNA in Icelandic skeletons. But this wasn't just about goods, it was about knowledge. A Viking trader buried in Sweden clutched a weight scale with Arabic numerals engraved, while rune stones in Greece mention men who died in the south in Cirkland, their graves marked with both crosses and Thor's hammers. Linguistic fingerprints are everywhere. The Russian word for money, denga, derives from Old Norse, as does the English egg and law. In Normandy, literally Northman's land, fishermen still use Norse terms for tidal currents. Even the days of the week honor their gods: Wednesday for Odin, Thursday for Thor. The routes also spread technology. The iconic Viking sun compass, which used polarized light to navigate cloudy seas, may have inspired later Arabic astrolabes. The system's collapse came from the very forces it helped create. As Christian kings consolidated power, they banned private raiding trading ventures, preferring taxed market towns. The Little Ice Age froze northern ports, while the Crusades opened safer Mediterranean alternatives. By the 13th century, the last Norse Greenlanders were chiseling desperate messages on runestones as their trade links withered. We starve because no ships come. Yet the legacy lingers in plain sight. The bustling stock exchange in Copenhagen. It stands where Viking ships once docked to unload Russian amber, the intricate filigree on a Ukrainian wedding headdress. Its design mirrors Norse brooches found near Kiev, and when Icelandic singers perform medieval epics about far-off Baghdad, they're keeping alive the memory of a time when the world was connected not by algorithms, but by the creak of oars and the smell of salt cod in a ship's hold. The Vikings may have vanished from their trade routes, but their fingerprints remain etched into our languages, our cities, even the stars we use to navigate by. Deep in the savannas and rainforests of Africa, where the equator's heat presses down like a forger's breath, Another kind of fire reshaped civilizations, not the flames of war, but the smelting furnaces that turned earth into iron. Long before European ships appeared on the horizon, a web of trails crisscrossed the continent, carrying not gold or spices, but something far more transformative, the tools that built kingdoms from the ground up. This was the African Iron Route Network, a system so vital it turned soil into swords, hoes into harvests, and ordinary villages into empires. The secret to its power lay in a simple alchemy. While Europe languished in its so-called Dark Ages, West African metallurgists were perfecting techniques that would dazzle the world. In Nigeria's Nok culture, as early as 500 BC, artisans built furnaces so hot they could liquefy iron ore, pouring it into molds for everything from ceremonial sculptures to farming tools. Further south, the great Zimbabwe civilization stacked clay furnaces like beehives, their chimneys dotting the landscape like smokestacks of an industrial revolution centuries ahead of its time. These weren't just craftsmen, they were the Silicon Valley innovators of their era, turning local laterite deposits into the continent's most sought-after commodity. The trade routes themselves were marvels of ingenuity. Unlike the camel caravans of the Sahara, iron moved on foot along paths worn smooth by generations of porters. In the dense forests of Guinea, miners hauled ore to riverside smelting villages where specialized blacksmith castes, some revered as near-magical figures, worked their transformations. Finished goods then traveled east to the Nile or north to the Sahel, where Berber traders swapped them for salt and glass beads. Archaeologists have uncovered Ugandan iron hoes in Kenyan burial sites and Nigerian spearheads as far away as Mauritania, proof that this network knit the continent together long before colonial borders divided it. Iron's impact went far beyond economics. When the Kingdom of Axum armed its armies with locally forged swords, it held off Roman incursions into the Horn of Africa. The Bantu migrations, one of history's most consequential population movements, were supercharged by iron tools that cleared forests for farmland across southern Africa. Even spiritual life revolved around metal. In Mali's Man tradition, blacksmiths were believed to channel the creative force of the cosmos, their bellows breathing life into inert earth. Then came the rupture. As European ships began anchoring off the gold and slave coasts in the 15th century, the demand for human captives overshadowed all other trades. Coastal kingdoms that had once thrived on iron exports pivoted to trafficking people, while inland smelting centers withered without their traditional markets. The final blow came with industrialization. British and Belgian factories flooded Africa with cheap steel goods, rendering centuries-old forges obsolete almost overnight. Yet walk through rural Africa today, and you'll find whispers of the iron roads everywhere. The Dogon people of Mali still perform smelting rituals using clay furnaces unchanged since the Middle Ages. In Nigeria's Oyo region, families passed down wrought iron staffs that once symbolized royal authority. And when a Tanzanian farmer digs his hoe into the soil, its curved blade mirrors those found in thousand-year-old Swahili ruins. The roads may be gone, but the metal remembers, and in its quiet strength lies the untold story of a continent that built itself from the ground up, one glowing ember at a time. Beneath the sprawling cities and interstate highways of the Americas lies a ghostly latticework of trade routes, paths where footsteps once carried not just goods, but entire worldviews. Picture a runner from Choco Canyon sprinting across the desert with a pouch of turquoise for Aztec nobles, or a canoe slicing through the Great Lakes, its hull packed with copper from Michigan's Upper Peninsula. These were the amber routes of the Americas, though they traded far more than amber. Obsidian blades sharper than steel, macaw feathers from the tropics, even cacao beans that served as currency in Mayan marketplaces. Unlike the Silk Road's caravans, these networks thrived on reciprocity rather than profit, binding communities through shared need rather than coin. Take the famous Turquoise Trail, a web of paths radiating from New Mexico's Cerrillos mines. By tracing chemical signatures in artifacts, archaeologists have matched turquoise from these pits to ceremonial masks in Guatemala and inlays at Mexico's Teotihuacan. The logistics were staggering. Raw stone traveled over 2,000 miles without beasts of burden, passed hand to hand through relay systems that could move goods faster than Spanish horses centuries later. At Choco Canyon's Pueblo Bonito, a single room held 50,000 pieces of turquoise, not hoarded wealth, but a sacred material believed to channel rain from the heavens. Then there's the Obsidian trade, a technological revolution disguised as commerce. From Oregon's glass butts to Patagonia's Pampa del Asador, this volcanic glass was the razor blade of the ancient world, flaked into tools that could slice through hide or carve jade. The best deposits became pilgrimage sites. Mexico's Pachuca Obsidian, with its gold sheen, reached Incan surgeons in Peru, while Wyoming's obsidian arrowheads turned up in Hopewell burial mounds in Ohio. What's astonishing is the precision of these exchanges. At California's Borax Lake site, researchers found obsidian sourced from 12 distinct quarries, each chosen for specific properties: translucent flakes for ceremonial blades, tougher varieties for hunting points. But the most haunting trade item wasn't stone or feather, it was seashells. The Gulf of California's spiny oyster shells, transformed into beads, became a continental currency. Cahokia's mound builders wore them as status symbols, while Pacific Northwest tribes embedded them in totem poles as eyes of ancestral spirits. In Florida, Calusa kings received shell gorgets from as far away as Tennessee, their intricate carvings telling stories of underwater panthers and celestial serpents. These weren't mere decorations, they were contracts, treaties, and sacred texts rendered in iridescent calcium. Colonization didn't just disrupt these routes, it erased their very memory. Spanish land grants chopped through ancient trading corridors, while U.S. railroad surveys dismissed indigenous trails as game paths, yet the land remembers. Modern highways like Route 66 unknowingly trace segments of the Great North Road that connected Choco to Mesa Verde. In the Amazon, the Kayapo people still follow hidden paths marked by centuries-old rubber trees, their canoes laden with Brazil nuts destined for markets their ancestors would recognize. The most poignant survivals live in ceremony. When Navajo jewelers set turquoise in silver today, they use designs passed down from traders who once walked to Chaco. The Hopi butterfly dance, with its vibrant sash of macaw feathers, echoes pre-Columbian commerce with Mesoamerica. And in British Columbia, potlatch feasts still distribute copper shields, a tradition stretching back to when Tlingit traders paddled Alaskan copper to Aztec nobility. These aren't just cultural footnotes, they're proof that some roads never truly vanish, they just wait beneath the surface for us to listen. While camel caravans dominate our imagination of the Silk Road, the real heavy lifting happened on waves, where Chinese junks with bat-wing sails and Arab dhows with triangular lateens danced across monsoons, carrying cargo that would reshape civilizations. The Maritime Silk routes formed a liquid highway more vast than any overland trail, stretching from Guangzhou's bustling harbors to Zanzibar's spice-scented docks, with stops in Java's volcanic ports and Kerala's coconut-shrouded coves. This wasn't just trade, it was a slow-motion cultural revolution, where every wave carried ideas as transformative as the goods in a ship's hold. The genius of these routes lay in their seasonal choreography. Sailors timed voyages to the monsoon winds, riding the southwest gusts from April to September to reach Africa, then catching the northeast trades in winter to return. A single voyage from Oman to China could take 18 months, with crews wintering in Malacca's safe harbors, swapping not just silk for frankincense but shipbuilding tricks with Javanese craftsmen. The result, hybrid vessels like the Kunlun bow Chinese hulls with Sumatran outriggers that could outpace any European caravel until the 15th century. What traveled these routes would fill a museum. Persian glassmakers sent cobalt to China, where it colored Ming Dynasty porcelain. Sri Lankan cinnamon bark wrapped in palm leaves flavored Roman feasts. But the most precious cargo wasn't tangible. Buddhist monks from Nalanda hitched rides to Sumatra, seeding temples like Borobudur. A single shipwreck off Belitung Island held 60,000 Tang Dynasty ceramics, proof of industrial-scale production meant solely for export. Even disease vectors moved along these currents. The Black Death likely reached Europe via Genos traders fleeing Kaffa, who'd caught it from Mongol caravans linked to maritime hubs. The route's decline came not from obscurity but from brutal competition. When Portuguese cannons blasted through Malacca's gates in 1511, they didn't just conquer a city, they shattered a delicate ecosystem of shared harbors and multilingual middlemen. Dutch and British East India companies later imposed monopolies, replacing the old barter system with armed greed. Yet traces of the Maritime Silk Road linger in unexpected places. In Gujarat, shipwrights still build match was using stitch and groove techniques unchanged since Phoenician times. Yemeni families passed down brass chests from their ancestors' voyages to Canton. And when you sip a cup of chai, you're tasting a recipe born when Indian tea met Arabian sugar, two commodities that once crossed paths only on these forgotten sea lanes. The ocean remembers what maps forget. Next time you see a Latin sail on a painting or hear the call to prayer in a Malaysian port, listen closely. Those are echoes of a time when half the world's languages could be heard in a single harbor, and the sea wasn't a barrier, it was the widest road of all. Long before the Parthenon's marble gleamed under the Attic sun, another Greek civilization mastered the art of connection, not with philosophers' words, but with merchant scales and sailors' star charts. The Mycenaeans, those shadowy figures behind Homer's tales of Troy, wove a trade network so intricate it turned the Mediterranean into a Bronze Age internet, where tin from Cornwall could end up in a warrior's sword in Cyprus, and Baltic amber might adorn a queen's necklace in Thebes. Their clay tablets, etched with Linear B script, reveal receipts for olive oil shipments measured in precise units, cargo manifests listing Egyptian gold alongside Anatolian horses, and even work orders for ship repairs, proof that this was commerce on an industrial scale. What set the Mycenaeans apart wasn't just their appetite for trade, but their genius for adaptation. Unlike the palace-bound Minoans they eclipsed, they built fortified ports like Pylos and Turins at strategic coastal bottlenecks, controlling the flow of goods like ancient toll operators. Their ships, sturdy vessels with crescent hulls painted with octopus motifs, braved routes later Greeks would fear, sailing beyond the Pillars of Hercules for British tin and down the Nile for Nubian ebony. Archaeologists have found Mycenaean pottery in Sardinia's Nurag towers, Sicilian tombs, and even the Levant, each shard a breadcrumb trail of lost connections. The real magic happened in their workshops. At Mycenae's citadel, artisans alloyed Cypriot copper with Afghan tin to forge bronze, so prized that Hittite kings demanded it as tribute. Their perfumers blended Cretan saffron with Libyan lilies to create unguents that scented Egyptian pharaohs' burials. Even their humble pottery told a story of cultural fusion. Jars shaped like Anatolian drinking horns but decorated with argive spirals, destined for tables in Ugarit. This wasn't mere exchange, it was alchemy where materials became status symbols and ideas crossed borders faster than armies. Then came the collapse. Around 1200 BC, a perfect storm of earthquakes, droughts, and mysterious sea peoples invasions shattered the network. Palaces burned, trade routes frayed, and the Linear B script vanished so completely that scholars wouldn't decipher it again for 3,000 years. The Mediterranean plunged into a dark age where once bustling ports lay empty, and the art of writing disappeared from Greece for centuries. Yet like all great networks, it left ghosts. Homer's epics preserved garbled memories of Mycenaean wealth, the well-built Troy with its towers of stone, the gold-rich Mycenae where Agamemnon ruled. Later Greek temples reused colossal Mycenaean masonry blocks, not knowing who'd cut them, and in a twist of poetic justice, the very tin routes the Mycenaeans pioneered would later supply their descendants, the classical Greeks, with bronze to forge a new world. The circle remained unbroken, just forgotten. Today, when you see a Greek fisherman mend his nets using knots identical to those on a Bronze Age seal, or hear a Cretan lyre playing a melody that echoes Mesopotamian hymns, you're glimpsing the afterlife of a network that refused to die. The maps may have faded, but the connections, like the wine dark sea itself, endure. Imagine a world where a single merchant's ledger could dictate the price of wool in London, timber in Novgorod, and beer in Cologne, all without a king's decree or an army's threat. This was the power of the Hanseatic League, a sprawling network of guilds and ports that turned medieval Europe into a playground of commerce, where a fisherman's catch in Bergen could end up on a nobleman's table in Bruges within weeks. Unlike the Silk Road's caravans or the Amber Road's solitary traders, the Hansa operated like a medieval multinational with its own laws, its own navy, and even its own spies. Their routes weren't just paths, they were a skeleton key to wealth, unlocking cities from the icy wharfs of Norway to the bustling dyeworks of Flanders. At its peak, the League's influence stretched so wide that its trading posts called contours became cities within cities. In London, the Steelyard by the Thames was a walled German enclave where merchants paid rents in silver marks, not English pounds. Novgorod's Peterhof, guarded by its own church and jail, stored Russian furs bound for Venetian aristocrats, but the real magic lay in the logistics. Hansa ships, known as cogs, were floating fortresses with high sides to repel pirates, and hulls so capacious they could carry 300 tons of salt or grain. They moved in convoy, timed to the herring migrations off Scandinavia, because where the fish swarmed, so did customers hungry for salted preserves. The League's secret weapon wasn't just goods, but trust. Their Hanseatic privileges, negotiated with rulers from Ireland to Poland, meant members paid lower tariffs, settled disputes in their own courts, and even enjoyed tax exemptions. A merchant from Lübeck could strike a deal in Riga with nothing but a handshake, and the shared understanding that cheating meant exile from every contour from Iceland to Prussia. This system birthed innovations we take for granted today: standardized weights, bills of exchange, and even early insurance policies where losses at sea were shared across the guild. Yet the routes themselves were surprisingly fragile. The League avoided overland trails whenever possible, relying on rivers like the Elbe and the Vistula, or shortcuts like the Lübeck Canal, one of Europe's first artificial waterways. In winter, when ice choked the Baltic, merchants switched to sledges pulled along frozen rivers, their cargoes wrapped in reindeer hides, but climate shifts and political storms proved harder to navigate. As the Little Ice Age shortened trading seasons and new sea routes to Africa and Asia emerged, the Hansa's monopoly crumbled. The final blow came when nation-states like England and Sweden refused to renew their privileges, preferring to tax rather than collaborate. What's astonishing is how much of the League survives in plain sight. The sleek glass towers of Hamburg's Hafen city stand where Hanseatic warehouses once held Russian wax and Flemish cloth. The word stock exchange traces back to the Bruges Square where German merchants traded under a tree called Terbuers. Even the humble pretzel, twisted to resemble arms crossed in prayer, was a Hansa invention baked by guild bakers to reward children who memorized trade routes. The next time you use a credit card or check a shipping container's barcode, remember, these are echoes of a system forged by medieval merchants who proved the world could be knit together not by swords, but by ledgers and mutual interest. The league's roads may have faded, but their lesson endures. Commerce at its best builds bridges that outlast empires. Deep in the sweltering jungles of Veracruz, where howler monkeys shriek from towering ceiba trees, the Olmecs carved civilization from stone and swamp over 3,000 years ago. These weren't just pyramid builders or artists, they were Mesoamerica's first great connectors, weaving trade routes through terrain so hostile that even modern hikers tread carefully. Picture a canoe gliding down the Coatzacoalcos River, its hull packed with blocks of jade so green they seem to hold the jungle's soul, or a barefoot porter balancing a sack of rubber balls along a muddy trail, destined for a sacred ball game 100 miles inland. The Olmecs didn't just move goods, they moved ideas, and their invisible highways became the blueprint for every civilization that followed in their footsteps. What made these routes extraordinary was their audacity. Without wheels, beasts of burden, or metal tools, Olmec traders navigated crocodile-infested rivers and mosquito-choked marshes to transport jade from Guatemala's Motagua Valley, the only source of the precious stone in all Mesoamerica. Archaeologists have found Olmec-style carvings in highland caves hundreds of miles from their Gulf Coast heartland, proof that their influence rippled far beyond their iconic colossal heads. The real currency wasn't just jade or rubber, it was ideology. When an Olmec trader handed a local chieftain a polished obsidian mirror, he wasn't just offering a tool, he was gifting a symbol of divine vision, wrapped in the prestige of a distant, powerful culture. The rubber trade reveals another layer of ingenuity. The Olmecs harvested latex from Panama rubber trees, mixing it with morning glory vine juice to create bouncy balls for their ritual games, the world's first synthetic rubber. These games weren't sport, they were cosmic theater, reenacting myths of life, death, and rebirth. Courts sprouted along trade routes like ceremonial pit stops, binding distant communities through shared spectacle. A single rubber ball could travel from Veracruz's steaming lowlands to Oaxaca's arid highlands, leaving behind more than just merchandise. It carried the seeds of a cultural revolution. Yet by 400 BC, the Olmec heartland lay abandoned, their trade routes swallowed by vines and silence. Climate shifts, political unrest, or perhaps simply the weight of their own grandeur may have caused their decline. But like a stone dropped in water, their influence rippled outward. Maya merchants adopted Olmec jade routes, etching their own symbols onto heirloom pieces centuries old. Aztec poets told of the people from the land of rubber, who'd vanished but left their gods behind. Even the word Olmec comes from the Aztec Nahuatl language, meaning rubber people, a ghostly tribute to traders whose footsteps had long since faded. Today, echoes of these routes linger in unexpected places. Modern rubber tappers in Tabasco still harvest latex using techniques unchanged since Olmec times. The ancient jade mines of Guatemala, once thought exhausted, continue to yield stones coveted by collectors. And in the village of La Venta, children play soccer near a buried Olmec ball court, their laughter bouncing across the same earth where rubber once soared toward stone hoops, carrying prayers to the gods. The roads may be gone, but their imprint remains not just in artifacts, but in the very DNA of Mesoamerica's soul. the monsoon rains that drench Thailand's Chao Phraya River basin today fall on landscapes that once pulsed with the footsteps of merchants speaking a dozen languages, their ox carts laden with goods that spanned half the ancient world. This was the realm of the Devaravati, a mysterious kingdom that flourished between the 6th and 11th centuries, weaving together threads of Indian Buddhism, Chinese ceramics, and indigenous Mon culture into a tapestry of commerce and spirituality. Unlike the grand empires that overshadow it in history books, Devaravati left no sprawling capitals or warrior epics. Instead, its legacy lies in the quiet details, a terracotta Buddha's serene smile mirroring Gupta Indian styles, a potsherd stamped with Tang dynasty markings found near a local kiln, or the faint outline of a canal system that once connected riverine ports to overland trails. At the crossroads of mainland Southeast Asia, Devaravati's merchants mastered the art of connection. Their dugout canoes plied the Mekong and Chao Phraya rivers, carrying Burmese teak to Cambodian shipbuilders and Vietnamese pearls to Sri Lankan temples. Overland, their elephant caravans followed trails etched into the landscape by generations of traders' paths that later became the foundation for modern highways. The real genius lay in their cultural brokerage. When Indian Buddhist monks arrived preaching the Lotus Sutra, Devaravati artisans didn't simply copy foreign idols. They blended them with local earth goddess traditions, creating a unique aesthetic where Hindu Naga serpents coiled protectively around the Theravada stupas. The archaeological record whispers of astonishing exchanges. At Yuthong, a key Devaravati hub, excavations revealed Roman glass beads alongside Han Dynasty mirrors, suggesting connections stretching far beyond the region. Their coinage, silver pieces stamped with conch shells and dharma wheels, became the template for later Thai money. Even their irrigation systems, designed to nourish rice paddies along trade routes, influenced Angkor's hydraulic empire to the east. Then came the slow fade. As Khmer power grew and maritime trade shifted to Sumatra's Srivijaya network, Devaravati's overland routes lost relevance. By the 13th century, its cities were swallowed by jungle, their brick stupas crumbling into the earth. Yet the kingdom's essence endured in unexpected ways. The graceful curves of Devaravati Buddha statues became the prototype for Thai sacred art, visible today in Ayutthaya's temples. The Mon language, once the lingua franca of these routes, still colors Thai place names like Lamphun and Ratchaburi. Even the Y, the palms together greeting ubiquitous in Thailand, may trace back to Devaravati-era depictions of Buddhist devotion. To walk through a modern Thai market is to tread the ghostly footsteps of these ancient traders. The durian fruit stacked in piles follows the same seasonal rhythms that once guided merchants to port. The gold-leafed amulets sold near monasteries carry designs unchanged from Devaravati molds. And when a farmer in Suffern Berry tends his rice field, the irrigation channels mirror those dug 1,000 years ago to sustain caravans. The roads themselves may have vanished beneath sugarcane fields and shopping malls, but their spirit lingers in the way cultures still meet and merge here, in the unbroken chain of hands passing goods and ideas across generations, proving that some connections never truly break. The vast Pacific Ocean, stretching empty and endless across a third of our planet, seems an unlikely place for ancient trade routes until you hold a single shard of Lapita pottery in your hand. These intricately patterned clay fragments, stamped with delicate tooth-like designs, tell a different story, one of fearless sailors who turned the world's largest ocean into a highway millennia before European explorers dared venture beyond sight of land. The Lapita didn't just trade goods, they traded the very blueprint of Pacific civilization, carrying not only pots and tools but the seeds of languages, rituals, and navigation secrets that would echo across generations. What's astonishing is the scale of their ambition. Starting around 1500 BC from the Bismarck archipelago near New Guinea, Lapita voyagers set out in double-hulled canoes lashed with coconut fiber rope, their sails woven from pandanus leaves. With no compasses or charts, just the stars, swell patterns, and the flight paths of birds, they leapfrogged from island to island, sometimes traveling over 2,000 kilometers between stops. Each new settlement became a node in a sprawling network. Obsidian from New Britain reached Fiji, shells from Vanuatu turned up in Samoa. Their signature pottery, thin-walled and fire-blackened, served as both cooking ware and cultural passport. Archaeologists can trace family connections across the Pacific by subtle variations in the geometric designs, like ancient barcodes whispering of kinship and trade. But the Lapita's real cargo was knowledge. When they landed on virgin shores, they brought not just the tools to survive, but the wisdom to thrive. Taro and breadfruit cuttings transformed barren atolls into food forests. Stone adze-making techniques allowed communities to carve new canoes for further exploration. Even their burial customs, placing skulls of ancestors in sacred shrines, became a cultural template still visible in Polynesian Mari temples. This wasn't random migration. It was a deliberate web of connection where each voyage strengthened the network like strands in a great fishing net. Then, around 500 BC, the pottery stops. The Lapita as a distinct culture fade from the archaeological record, their trade routes dissolving like wake behind a canoe. But this disappearance was an illusion. They hadn't vanished, they'd evolved. Their descendants, the Polynesians, inherited their nautical genius and pushed even farther, to Tahiti, Hawaii, and eventually Rapa Nui. The proof lies in language. From Maori to Hawaiian, over 500 modern Pacific dialects share roots in the Proto-Oceanic tongue spoken by Lapita traders. It lingers in navigation techniques still taught in the Caroline Islands, where apprentices memorize star paths their ancestors followed 3,000 years ago. Today, when a Hawaiian outrigger racing team trains by reading ocean swells, or when Samoan elders chant genealogies that stretch back to mythical Hawaii, they're channeling the Lapita legacy. Modern GPS might guide ships now, but the old ways aren't forgotten. In New Zealand's Te Papa Museum, a replica Lapita pot sits beside a smartphone running a star mapping app. Two technologies separated by millennia, yet united by the same purpose, helping us find our way across the vast, uncharted waters of our world. The Lapita routes may have vanished from maps, but their lesson endures. The ocean was never a barrier. For those who knew how to listen, it was always a road. Before the first mechanical loom ever clattered to life, the world was already draped in a web of textile trade so vast it could clothe empires. Picture a Gujarati weaver in ancient India, his hands spinning cotton so fine it was called woven wind, destined to grace the shoulders of Roman senators who believed it grew on trees. Or imagine a caravan of Bactrian camels plodding through the Taklamakan desert, their loads of Chinese silk so precious that each bolt was worth its weight in gold when it reached Constantinople. These were the cloth roads, less celebrated than the Silk Road, but no less transformative, carrying not just fabrics but the very threads of cultural identity across continents. The magic of these routes lay in their specialization. While the Silk Road is remembered for its namesake luxury, dozens of parallel trails thrived on humbler commodities. The cotton route from India's Deccan Plateau fed the looms of Egypt, where mummies from the 1st century AD have been found wrapped in fabric dyed with Indian indigo. In West Africa, the famed cloth of gold, actually finely woven cotton with metallic threads, traveled from Timbuktu to Mediterranean markets, becoming a status symbol for European nobility. Even the Incas had their own textile highways, where llamas carried alpaca wool from Andean highlands to coastal weavers, creating garments so tightly knit they could turn a spear's thrust. Silk, of course, was the ultimate status symbol, so coveted that China guarded its production secrets for centuries under penalty of death. But the real surprise is how far it traveled beyond elite circles. Along the steppe route, nomads bartered scraps of silk for horses, using the fabric to line their saddles or wrap ceremonial swords. In Viking graves as far north as Norway, archaeologists have found silk fragments repurposed as hair ribbons, proof that even fierce warriors appreciated a touch of luxury. The Byzantine Empire went further, industrializing stolen silkworm eggs into a state monopoly that funded its armies for generations. Then came the unraveling. When British steam-powered mills began flooding global markets with cheap calico in the 18th century, handloom economies from Bengal to Mexico collapsed almost overnight. The same ships that carried Indian cotton to Manchester brought back machine-made cloth, undercutting local weavers by dizzying margins. In a cruel twist, some of the most famous textile routes reversed direction. Egypt's thriving linen industry, once supplying pharaohs and prophets alike, found itself importing English cotton by the 1800s. Yet the cloth roads left patterns too deep to erase. The vibrant Kent cloth of Ghana still uses weaving techniques learned from 12th century North African traders. Indonesia's batik makers preserve motifs brought by Indian merchants a millennium ago. Even the word calico itself, now a generic term, comes from Calicut, the Indian port where Europeans first encountered the fabric. Next time you pull on a pair of jeans, look closely. That indigo dye traces its lineage to the same fields that once colored the robes of Tutankhamun. The looms may have fallen silent, but their legacy wraps around us still, in every stitch, every pattern, every thread that binds our past to our present. 5,000 years ago, a merchant in the bustling city of unrolled a sheet of copper as thin as parchment, not hammered into armor or forged into weapons, but pressed with cuneiform markings to certify its purity and weight. This was the world's first form of standardized currency, and it traveled thousands of miles from mines in Cyprus and Oman to reach Mesopotamian markets. The copper routes, often overshadowed by the glitter of gold and silver, were the unsung arteries of early civilization, turning raw ore into the tools that built cities and the coins that fueled economies. At the heart of this network lay Cyprus, an island so rich in copper that its very name gave us the Latin cuprum, the root of copper. Ancient miners dug vertical shafts deep into the Troodos Mountains, using fire-setting techniques to crack open veins of malachite and azurite. The extracted ore was smelted in clay furnaces fueled by Cyprus's dense pine forests, producing ingots shaped like ox hides for easy transport. These distinctive oxhide ingots became the universal currency of Bronze Age trade, found in shipwrecks from Turkey to Sardinia. A single sunken vessel off Uluburun, Turkey, carried 10 tons of Cypriot copper, enough to outfit an entire army with weapons and shields. But Cyprus was just one node in a sprawling web. In Oman's Wadi Jizzi, miners tapped into deposits so pure they required little smelting, shipping raw copper to Mesopotamia via dhows that hugged the Persian Gulf Coast. The Sinai Peninsula's turquoise mines doubled as copper sources, supplying Egypt's workshops where artisans alloyed it with tin to craft everything from surgical tools to temple doors. Even Britain's Cornish mines, though far from the Mediterranean centers of power, contributed to the network, their ore reaching Central Europe through middlemen who traded it for amber and furs. Copper's true power lay in its versatility. In Sumer, it lined irrigation channels to prevent erosion, while in the Indus Valley, it was drawn into wires for intricate jewelry. The metal's antibacterial properties made it prized for cookware and medical instruments. A 4th millennium BC Egyptian medical text prescribes copper shavings for eye infections. But its most revolutionary role was as the backbone of urbanization. Without copper chisels, the stone blocks of Mohenjo-Daro's citadel couldn't have been quarried. Without copper nails, Byblos's cedar-planked ships would never have sailed. The routes thrived on interdependence. Cyprus supplied Mesopotamia, but relied on Mesopotamian barley to feed its miners. Oman's copper bought Indian ivory for Assyrian kings, while Cretan artisans depended on Anatolian tin to transform Cypriot copper into bronze. This wasn't just trade, it was a delicate dance of reciprocity that stabilized early economies. Then came the unraveling. Iron, harder and more abundant, began displacing bronze around 1200 BC. The Sea People's invasions disrupted shipping lanes, while deforestation in Cyprus stripped the island of fuel for smelting. By the time Rome ruled the Mediterranean, copper was reduced to a humble material for pipes and coins, its once vital routes crumbling into goat trails. Yet the copper routes never truly vanished. The brass hinges of medieval cathedrals reused Roman copper, while Venice's arsenal recycled ancient ingots for canonry. Modern geologists still follow ancient slag heaps to locate untapped veins, and in a quiet corner of the British Museum, a child marvels at a 4,000-year-old oxide ingot, its green patina hiding the truth. This unassuming lump of metal once built the world one trade at a time. Beneath the surface of modern highways and railroad tracks lies a much older network roads carved not by engineers, but by necessity, where every step carried the razor-sharp promise of survival. Obsidian, volcanic glass forged in the fires of the earth, became the lifeblood of early civilizations, traded across distances that would have seemed impossible for Stone Age societies. Imagine a hunter in Anatolia 12,000 years ago, carefully wrapping a chunk of glossy black stone in animal hide, knowing it would change hands a dozen times before reaching a craftsman in Mesopotamia who would shape it into blades sharper than modern surgical steel. These were the Obsidian roads, the original superhighways of human connection, invisible on today's maps but etched indelibly into our shared past. What made Obsidian so extraordinary wasn't just its utility, it was its scarcity. Formed only in specific volcanic regions like Turkey's Cappadocia, Armenia's Lake Sevan, or Mexico's Sierra Madre, the glass-like stone became a magnet for trade. A single nodule from Ethiopia's Karayu Valley could travel over 1,000 miles to reach Egyptian artisans, while obsidian from Wyoming's Yellowstone Plateau found its way to Ohio's Hopewell burial mounds. Archaeologists trace these routes using chemical fingerprints. Each source has a unique signature of trace elements, allowing them to match artifacts to their origins with astonishing precision. A blade unearthed in a Jordanian desert camp might reveal it came from a volcano in Armenia, proof of connections stretching further than we ever imagined. The mechanics of this trade rewrite our understanding of early humans. Without beasts of burden or wheeled carts, Neolithic traders carried obsidian on foot along trails that followed rivers and mountain passes. In Mesoamerica, Maya merchants paddled canoes loaded with prismatic blades along coastal routes, while in the Pacific, Polynesian navigators packed obsidian flakes in bamboo tubes to trade for feathers and shells. These weren't random exchanges, they followed strict protocols. At Catalhoyuk in Turkey, a 9,000-year-old neighborhood specialized in obsidian tool production, its workshops supplying villages across the Levant. The material was so valuable that some sites show evidence of quota systems. where clans controlled access to specific mines, hinting at trade agreements older than written language itself. Obsidian's true legacy lies in what it carried beyond practicality. In Egypt, ceremonial knives used in mummification were made from Ethiopian obsidian, believed to hold magical properties for the afterlife. The Aztecs offered mirrors polished from the stone to their gods, convinced its reflective surface could reveal other worlds. Even today, surgeons use obsidian scalpels for delicate eye operations, a direct lineage from the flint knappers of old. The roads themselves may have vanished, but their impact lingers in unexpected places. Modern highway systems in Turkey and Mexico often overlay ancient obsidian trails, their routes dictated by geography in ways our ancestors intuitively understood. When bronze and iron tools replaced stone, the obsidian roads faded into obscurity. Yet in a remote Armenian village, craftsmen still knap obsidian using techniques unchanged since the Stone Age, their hands moving in rhythms that would feel familiar to a trader from 8,000 years ago. The stone itself remains jagged, gleaming, and indestructible, a silent witness to the first great web of human connection, proving that even in a world without maps or money, we found ways to reach one another, one sharp edge at a time. Beneath the turquoise waters of the Mediterranean, where sunlight dances on ancient shipwrecks, another treasure once pulsed through hidden maritime routes, not gold or spices, but the blood-red branches of coral. Prized since Neolithic times for its otherworldly beauty and supposed healing powers, this Garden of the Sea fueled a trade network so vast it bankrolled entire coastal cities, only to vanish from maps as completely as the reefs that birthed it. Picture a Phoenician merchant in Tyre, carefully packing coral branches into amphorae stuffed with damp seaweed to keep them vibrant, knowing these delicate fronds would adorn Egyptian priestesses or Etruscan nobles before the next full moon. The coral trade's heartbeat was the Strait of Messina, where currents swirling between Sicily and Italy's toe nurtured dense forests of Corallium rubrum. Divers free dove 30 meters on a single breath, their weighted nets scraping the seabed like underwater harvesters. The raw branches, dull underwater, blazed crimson when exposed to air, a transformation so dramatic that Greek naturalists believed coral was Medusa's petrified blood. By the time it reached inland workshops, this organic gem had already traveled farther than most sailors dared. Artisans in Taranto twisted it into amulets to ward off the evil eye, while Roman doctors powdered it for elixirs claiming to stop bleeding or cure madness. Pliny the Elder wrote of coral's value exceeding silver by weight, and ship manifests from Alexandria reveal it was traded ounce for ounce with Indian sapphires. What made these routes extraordinary wasn't just the cargo, it was the cultural alchemy they sparked. Berber traders carried Sicilian coral across the Sahara to Timbuktu, where it was bartered for gold dust and woven into Tuareg bridal headdresses as fertility symbols. In medieval Venice, Armenian merchants blended crushed coral with egg whites to create the vivid pinks in illuminated manuscripts, while Genoese bankers accepted coral collateral for loans. The material even shaped geopolitics. When Spain seized control of Tunisian coral reefs in the 16th century, they funded their empire's expansion with what chroniclers called the red gold of the Mediterranean. Yet the coral routes didn't just spread wealth, they spread destruction. Overharvesting turned thriving reefs into underwater graveyards, forcing divers to venture deeper and riskier. By the 19th century, hydraulic dredges scraped the seabed bare, leaving behind silt clouds where vibrant ecosystems once flourished. The death knell came with synthetic dyes and plastics, which mimicked coral's color at a fraction of the cost. Cities like Trapani, where entire neighborhoods once clattered with coral carving workshops, pivoted to fishing or faded into obscurity, but traces of this forgotten network still glimmer. In Naples' Museo di Capodimonte, a 17th-century nativity scene features coral-studded angels. Their crimson wings a nod to old superstitions. Tunisian jewelers still craft komsa, hands from antique coral fragments passed down through generations. And off the coast of Sardinia, marine biologists recently discovered a lone Corallium rubrum colony thriving in a submarine canyon, its genetic code possibly linking back to the very stocks that once fed the ancient trade. Like the coral itself, this legacy proves that even the most vanished routes leave behind something indelible, not just in artifacts, but in the way we still covet the sea's fiery gifts, even as we strive to protect what remains. The first wine ever made might have been a happy accident, a forgotten clay jar of crushed grapes, left to ferment in the warm Georgian sun around 8,000 years ago. But what began as a serendipitous discovery soon became the lifeblood of civilizations, flowing along routes that connected cultures as surely as rivers carved through stone. Picture a Phoenician merchant ship anchored off the coast of Crete, its hold packed with amphorae sealed with pine resin, each vessel containing not just wine but an entire social ritual ready to be uncorked in a foreign land. From the Caucasus Mountains to the Nile Delta, these liquid highways carried more than a drink. They bore the very essence of hospitality, religion, and power, leaving stains on history far deeper than any on a banquet tablecloth. Georgia's Cuve, every massive earthen, where jars buried underground for fermentation were the beating heart of the earliest wine trade. Villagers along the Black Sea coast buried these vessels beneath their homes, creating vintages so distinctive that Egyptian pharaohs requested them by name. The wine traveled in animal skins and clay flasks along the Araxes River to Mesopotamia, where cuneiform tablets from detailed taverns serving the dark wine of the Hittites. But the real magic happened when these routes reached the Mediterranean. Phoenician traders, those ancient sommeliers of the sea, recognized wine's potential as the world's first luxury commodity. They established vineyards in Carthage and Sicily, adapting Georgian techniques to local grapes, and in doing so, turned wine from a local tradition into a global phenomenon. Rome's conquest supercharged these routes into an empire-wide obsession. Legionnaires marching across Gaul carried vine cuttings like botanical battle trophies, planting vineyards from Bordeaux to the Rhine. The famed Via Appia became a wine-slicked thoroughfare, where carts laden with Falernian, the Chateau Lafite of its day, rumbled toward aristocratic tables. Pliny the Elder catalogued over 80 grape varieties, while Pompeii's ruins reveal Thermopolia, ancient wine bars where patrons could choose between cheap local plonk and expensive imports stamped with producers' marks, a Bronze Age version of appellation control. The Romans didn't just transport wine, they industrialized its production, with slave-staffed estates like the Villa dei Misteri near Pompeii producing thousands of amphorae annually. Yet the most enduring legacy of these routes wasn't in the wine itself, but in what it carried culturally. Greek symposia, drinking parties where philosophy flowed as freely as wine, spread to Etruscan nobles who added their own rituals of katobos, a game of flinging wine dregs at targets. In Celtic Europe, wine replaced mead as the drink of chieftains, with imported Roman jugs buried as status symbols in chieftains' graves. Even religions were shaped by these liquid exchanges. Judaism's Kiddush wine, Christianity's Eucharistic wine, and Dionysian mysteries all borrowed from the cross-pollination of vineyards along trade routes. The roads faded as empires crumbled, but their fingerprints linger in every glass poured today. The terraced vineyards of Portugal's Douro Valley mirror Phoenician farming methods. Georgian Cuve, every winemaking nearly erased by Soviet industrialization, now enjoys a global renaissance among natural wine enthusiasts. and when you swirl a Cabernet Sauvignon, you're tasting a grape whose DNA traces back to Roman plantings in Gascony. The amphorae may be museum pieces now, but the connections they forged between hands that planted, poured, and shared across millennia remain as intoxicating as ever. Beneath the turquoise shallows of the Persian Gulf, where the seafloor glows like a scattered treasure chest, divers once risked everything for nature's most perfect jewels and pearls. Not the cultured beads we know today, but wild gems formed by chance, each one a tiny miracle of time and pressure. Imagine a Bahraini-free diver in the 1800s, holding his breath for 2 minutes as he plunges 20 meters on a single weighted rope, his ears aching from the pressure as he gropes for oysters in the murky light. A single perfect pearl from these waters could buy a man's freedom from debt, a dowry for his daughter, or passage to a new life. This was the heart of the pearl routes, a network of maritime trails that turned the Gulf into the world's luxury hub for over 4,000 years, long before oil dominated its economy. The mechanics of this trade were as intricate as the pearls themselves. From Bahrain's legendary pearl beds described in Assyrian texts as early as 2000 BC, house carried sacks of unopened oysters to Basra's markets, where merchants gambled on their contents like modern-day stock traders. The finest specimens, creamy white with a roseate shimmer, traveled to Bombay's sorting houses, where they were matched by size and luster before continuing to Parisian jewelers or Mughal emperors' treasuries. Lesser pearls weren't wasted. They lined the hems of Ottoman turbans, adorned Thai temple statues, or were ground into potions for Chinese aristocrats who believed they conferred immortality. The Gulf's pearls became so synonymous with wealth that Cleopatra allegedly dissolved one in vinegar to win a bet with Mark Antony, proving she could consume a fortune in a single sip. What made these routes extraordinary wasn't just the distance they covered from Zanzibar to Venice, but the societies they built along the way. In Bahrain, entire villages revolved around the diving season, known as Gauss, when even children sorted oysters by moonlight. The rhythm of the trade birthed a unique financial system. Daily loans advanced supplies to divers before the season, while Tawash brokers auctioned pearls using secret hand signals still practiced in Dubai's gold souks today. The sea's bounty funded unexpected innovations. Kuwait's first schools and hospitals were built by pearl merchants, while Bahrain's Majlis system of community councils traces back to disputes over oyster beds. Then came the crash. In the early 20th century, Japanese entrepreneur Kokichi Mikamoto perfected cultured pearls, flooding the market with identical orbs at a fraction of the cost. The Great Depression sealed the Gulf's fate. By 1930, a pearl that once bought a palace sold for the price of a loaf of bread. Divers swapped their knives for oil-rig tools, and the D-house that once carried fortunes now hauled fishing nets. Yet the pearl routes left indelible marks. In Doha's Museum of Islamic Art, a single strand of natural Gulf pearls glows under glass, their irregular shapes telling a story no perfect cultured bead can replicate. The Fijiri work songs sung by divers still echo at Bahraini weddings, their rhythms mimicking the pull of the tide. And when a bride in Mumbai wears her grandmother's pearl nose ring, or a Parisian jeweler reserves the term Oriental Pearl for the rarest specimens, they're honoring a trade that didn't just move goods, it shaped identities, one luminous iridescence at a time. The shimmering alchemy of turning sand into glass was once a secret so closely guarded, its discovery mythologized in Pliny the Elder's tales of Phoenician merchants accidentally creating it over a campfire. But the true story of ancient glassmaking is etched into trade routes stretching from Mesopotamia's fiery kilns to the stained glass windows of medieval cathedrals, a journey where transparency itself became currency. Picture a Babylonian craftsman in 1500 BC, blowing through a hollow reed to shape molten silica into a perfume vial, unaware his technique would one day grace the windows of Versailles. Mesopotamia's Fertile Crescent wasn't just the cradle of agriculture, it was the birthplace of glass production on an industrial scale. At Nuzi, near modern Kirkuk, archaeologists uncovered furnaces capable of reaching temperatures over 1,000 degrees Celsius, along with cuneiform tablets detailing recipes for cobalt blue glass imitating lapis lazuli. This wasn't mere imitation, it was alchemy. By adding manganese or antimony, artisans decolorized glass to achieve crystal clarity, while tin created an opaque white mimic of porcelain. The results traveled along royal roads to Egypt, where Tutankhamun's death mask featured glass inlays so flawless they were mistaken for precious stones for centuries. The Phoenicians perfected the next revolution, glass blowing. Around the 1st century BC, Sidonian craftsmen discovered that inflating molten glass through a pipe allowed faster, cheaper production than older core-forming methods. Suddenly, glassware wasn't just for elites, it could store perfumes for Roman middle-class households or serve wine in Gaulish taverns. Sidon's workshops became factories, their products shipped across Mediterranean trade networks alongside olive oil and garum. A single shipwreck off the Italian coast held 10,000 blown glass vessels, proof of an ancient mass market. But the glass route's true brilliance lay in their cultural diffusion. Venetian merchants encountering Byzantine mosaic tesserae later revolutionized transparency with cristallo, a flawless glass so prized its recipes were state secrets. Islamic scientists in Damascus refined lenses for astronomy, while in China, imported glass beads inspired new glazing techniques for ceramics. Even the humble glass window, which transformed European architecture, traces back to Syrian craftsmen who first cast flat panes for desert palaces. The routes faded not from disuse but from ubiquity. As glassmaking knowledge spread, local workshops from Sweden to Sichuan began producing their own wares. Yet their legacy is anything but fragile. Next time you check your phone's touchscreen or admire a skyscraper's gleaming facade, remember, you're seeing the world through a lens forged on forgotten roads, where fire and sand once conspired to reshape human vision itself. Paper wasn't just a material, it was a quiet revolution smuggled along dusty caravan trails and tucked into the saddlebags of merchants who had no idea they were carrying the future. Picture a Tang Dynasty official in 8th century China, carefully wrapping a bundle of smooth mulberry bark sheets, unaware these humble pages would one day hold the words of Dante, the sketches of Da Vinci, and the equations of Newton. The journey of paper from China's imperial workshops to the libraries of Cordoba and the scriptoria of Paris is one of history's most underrated epics, a tale where knowledge itself became the ultimate contraband. The secret of papermaking was born in China around the 2nd century BC, when court eunuch Kai Lun perfected a pulp of mulberry fibers, hemp, and old fishing nets far lighter than bamboo slips and cheaper than silk. By the 6th century, Buddhist monks were stuffing scrolls into the hollow staves of pilgrims' walking sticks, smuggling the technology westward along the Silk Road's quieter branches. In Samarkand, a pivotal moment unfolded when Arab forces captured Chinese papermakers during the Battle of Tollas in 751. Instead of executing them, the victors recognized their value, setting up workshops that would supply the Abbasid Caliphate with the raw material for its intellectual golden age. What made these routes extraordinary wasn't just the paper's physical journey, it was how they transformed societies along the way. In Baghdad's House of Wisdom, scholars scribbled astronomical observations on Chinese-style paper, while in Cairo, merchants abandoned bulky clay tablets for lightweight contracts that could travel by camel. The Islamic world's adoption of paper turbocharged bureaucracy, science, and poetry alike. The poet Al-Mutanabi's verses could now be copied by the hundred, not just memorized by court bards. Even the format evolved. Persian scribes folded Chinese scrolls into codices, creating the bound book as we know it. Europe's turn came through backdoor channels. Paper entered via Islamic Spain, where the mills of Jatava supplied parchment-poor scholars in Toledo and Bologna. Crusaders, expecting to loot gold, returned with something more precious, reams of Syrian paper, which Italian merchants soon replicated in Fabriano's water-powered mills. The real game changer, Gutenberg's press might never have sparked a revolution without affordable paper to feed it. Those early Bibles, printed on sheets that traced their ancestry to Chinese mulberry groves, democratized literacy in ways even their creators couldn't foresee. Yet the roads that carried this revolution left little trace. Unlike stone highways or grand canals, paper routes were informal, shifting with politics and demand. The Mongol destruction of Baghdad's mills scattered artisans to Turkey and India, while the Black Death disrupted European production. By the time industrialization mechanized papermaking, the old overland trails had vanished beneath new trade networks. But their legacy is anything but fragile. Every time you jot a note, flip a paperback's page, or unfold a grocery list, you're handling the direct descendant of those Silk Road scrolls, proof that some highways don't need to be paved to change the world. They just need to carry ideas light enough to travel, yet durable enough to outlast empires. These ancient paths may have faded from sight, but their ghosts still walk among us in the spices we sprinkle on our meals, the words we speak without thinking, even the roads we drive without knowing they trace footsteps older than nations. The Silk Road didn't just move silk, it carried the first strains of Buddhism into China, the secret of papermaking into Europe, and the Black Death that would reshape continents. The Amber Road wasn't merely a highway for golden trinkets. It wove Norse sagas with Egyptian sun worship, Baltic thunder gods with Greek philosophers. Every vanished route is a palimpsest, its original purpose erased but its invisible ink still glowing beneath the surface of our modern world. Consider how profoundly these networks shaped the mundane details of our lives. That morning cup of coffee, its journey began on Ethiopian highlands traded along Red Sea routes before Ottoman merchants brewed it in Constantinople's shadowed bazaars. The numerals on your clock, they hitchhiked from India to Baghdad, then rode Arab traders' ships to Italy, where Fibonacci championed them against Roman traditionalists. Even the concept of a weekend traces back to Babylonian market cycles carried westward by Assyrian merchants. These aren't just historical footnotes, they're proof that globalization isn't a modern invention, but an ancient rhythm we've rediscovered. The most haunting lesson lies in their fragility. The royal road that once pulsed with Persian couriers is now a dusty track in rural Turkey. The incense route's bustling oases stand silent under Saudi sands. Empires rose and fell, but the routes endured until they didn't. Their disappearances whisper a warning: connection is never guaranteed. The same forces that dissolved them, climate shifts, political upheavals, technological disruption, still shape our world today. When the Hanseatic League's ledger books closed, it wasn't just a trading bloc collapsing, but a vision of cooperation that took centuries to rebuild. Yet resilience flickers in unexpected places. In Georgia, winemakers still ferment vintages in clay cuve, every as their Neolithic ancestors did. Tuareg salt caravans navigate Saharan dunes using star patterns unchanged since Mansa Musa's pilgrimage. These aren't living museums, but vital threads tying past to present, proof that some knowledge is too precious to lose. Perhaps that's the true gift of these vanished roads. They force us to ask what we're carrying forward and what might slip through our fingers if we're not careful. So the next time you unspool a ribbon of highway on your GPS, pause. Beneath the asphalt lies a fractal web of older paths, foot trails, wagon ruts, donkey tracks, each one a choice about where to go and how to get there. The routes may have vanished, but their questions remain. Who do we welcome at the crossroads? What do we carry? And how will the roads we build today be remembered when the maps fade? The answers, like the traders of old, are always in motion.